$250. That is what it costs to build a wooden shelter with insulated walls, a lockable door, and an interior temperature 30 to 40 degrees warmer than the air outside. A 6 by 10 foot structure strong enough to keep a person alive through a winter night that would kill them in a tent. Compare that to the average one-bedroom apartment in Seattle, which runs over $2,100 a month, or Denver, where studios regularly exceed $1,600. What volunteer builders and homeless communities have engineered with plywood, foam board, and salvaged materials across the Pacific Northwest, the Midwest, and the Mountain States is not charity guesswork. These are field-tested survival systems, refined through years of real winter conditions and shared through networks that now span most of the country. And the construction intelligence behind them is something most housing policy experts have never looked at closely enough. And the stakes are not abstract. Over 2,500 Americans died from hypothermia in 2023 alone. That number was up 35% from a decade earlier. The people dying are overwhelmingly older adults living outside, exposed to conditions their bodies simply cannot survive. In California alone, people 55 and older accounted for more than 3/4 of all hypothermia deaths over a 3-year period, and the proportion of single homeless adults over 50 has climbed from 11% in 1990 to nearly half today. This is not a fringe crisis, it is a growing one, and it is hitting an older population harder than anyone else. To understand why these shelters exist instead of traditional alternatives, you need to understand what happens at 5 p.m. on a freezing night in a city like Portland, Chicago, or Minneapolis. That is when emergency shelter beds fill up, the doors close, and the people who did not make it inside have nowhere to go. Over 770,000 Americans are homeless on any given night. That is the highest number the federal government has ever recorded. Emergency shelters across most major cities operate at or beyond capacity every winter, and beds fill hours before temperatures reach their most dangerous levels. Even when a spot opens, the conditions attached make it unworkable for a large number of people. Curfews from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. eliminate the possibility of holding evening or night shift employment. Couples are separated by gender. Pets are banned almost universally. Belongings get stolen routinely. And sobriety requirements exclude anyone dealing with addiction, which accounts for a significant share of the unsheltered population. A man building micro-shelters with a volunteer group in Eugene, Oregon, framed it this way: a shelter gives you a bed for the night, but takes your tools, your dog, your work schedule, and your independence. A $250 micro-shelter lets you keep everything. That math is not irrational. It is the same cost-benefit calculation anyone would make if they were standing outside at 15 degrees with no other option. And once that math clicks, the micro-shelter movement stops looking like a workaround and starts looking like the most practical engineering response to a crisis that the traditional system has failed to solve. The first design that changed what was possible is called the Conestoga Hut. It was created by a man named Eric DeBure, working with the nonprofit Community-Supported Shelters in Eugene, Oregon. The name comes from the Conestoga wagons that carried settlers across the American frontier, and the resemblance is deliberate. The structure is a 6 by 10 foot shelter built on an insulated plywood floor with 2 solid insulated end walls and a curved metal wire roof frame covered in vinyl and insulation. 60 square feet of enclosed, lockable, weatherproof living space. With donated and reclaimed materials, some builds have come in under $300. With new materials, a more permanent version runs around $2,500. Either way, a team of volunteers can assemble one in a few hours, not days. A few hours from bare ground to finished shelter with a lockable door and insulated walls. The engineering behind the shape is not decorative. The curved roof sheds rain and snow naturally without flat surfaces where water pools and seeps through. The insulated floor platform raises the occupant off frozen ground, which matters enormously because bare earth acts like a slow refrigerator, pulling body heat downward continuously through the night. And the lockable door gives occupants something a tent can never provide: security. On the streets, losing your belongings while you sleep can mean losing identification documents, medications, work tools, and the accumulated infrastructure that makes survival possible at all. A tent zipper is not a lock. Anyone walking past can open it. People wake up in tents to find their shoes stolen, their phones gone, their backpacks emptied. In a Conestoga hut, the door latches from the inside and locks from the outside. That single feature changes everything about what sleep looks like when you are homeless. Actual sleep, not the half-conscious vigilance that passes for rest on the streets. By 2021, volunteer teams in Eugene had built more than 84 Conestoga huts. The design had spread to communities across Oregon, Washington, and beyond. Waiting lists at sanctioned sites regularly exceeded available units. People preferred these shelters over traditional emergency beds because they offered something the shelter system structurally cannot: autonomy and security at the same time. One man on a waiting list in Eugene told a reporter he had turned down an emergency shelter bed twice while waiting for a Conestoga hut to open up. The shelter bed came with a curfew that would cost him his night shift job at a warehouse. The hut came with a lock and no curfew. He waited. The Conestoga hut works, but it requires organized volunteer builds, donated materials, and site access. For a single person sleeping outside tonight with $150 and access to a hardware store, a different design fills the gap: the plywood A-frame sleeping pod. This is the stripped-down minimum of what a survival shelter needs to be. Two 4-by-8-foot sheets of plywood leaned against each other at roughly a 45-degree angle, creating a triangular cross-section about 4 feet wide at the base and 5.5 feet tall at the peak. End walls close off each side. A small door cut into one. The materials cost runs under $150 with standard construction plywood, a few 2x4s for framing, and basic hardware. The triangular shape is structurally one of the strongest geometries available. Snow loads that would collapse a flat-roofed structure slide off an angled surface. Wind hitting a triangular profile generates far less lateral force than wind hitting a flat wall. And the compact interior volume means body heat from a single person raises the temperature inside meaningfully, because you are not wasting energy trying to warm unused space. The A-frame keeps you dry and blocks the wind, but without insulation, it is still a plywood box that conducts heat straight through the walls and leaves you freezing by midnight. The insulation system that experienced builders developed is where the real construction intelligence shows up. Rigid foam insulation board, the kind sold at any hardware store in 4-by-8-foot sheets, provides an R value of roughly 5 per inch for extruded polystyrene. 2 inches of foam board applied to the interior surfaces of a plywood shell creates an R10 insulation envelope. That is a measurable thermal barrier that cuts heat loss through the walls by a factor of 10 compared to bare plywood. Builders in Minneapolis and Chicago take this further by adding a layer of reflective mylar or foil-faced insulation behind the foam board. The reflective surface bounces radiant heat, the kind a human body produces, back into the interior instead of letting it pass through the wall. Same principle used in emergency space blankets applied to an entire shelter. The combination of foam board, reflective barrier, and an air gap of at least a ½ inch between the reflective layer and the outer plywood creates a thermal sandwich that rivals the wall insulation in houses built before 1980. Without that air gap, the reflective surface sits flat against the plywood and conducts heat right through. The gap is what makes the barrier work. It traps a thin layer of non-moving air that acts as its own insulation, and it gives the reflective surface space to bounce radiant heat back inward instead of absorbing it into the wood. Builders who skip this step and staple the mylar directly to the plywood wonder why the system does not perform. The answer is always the same: the gap. You know the system is working when condensation forms on the outer plywood wall, but the inner surfaces stay dry. That moisture is proof that warm air is being contained inside the insulation envelope, and cold air is staying on the outside where it belongs. A volunteer builder working with a church group in Denver put it this way: a tent in 15-degree weather feels like 15 degrees inside within an hour. An uninsulated plywood box feels like maybe 25 degrees. Add the foam and reflective barrier system, and you are sitting at 45 to 50 degrees inside from body heat alone. That 30-degree difference is the difference between sleeping uncomfortably and waking up with frostbite. So the structure holds, the insulation traps heat, but on the coldest nights in Minnesota, upstate New York, or the mountain states, body heat alone is not enough. You need supplemental warmth, and generating heat inside a small enclosed space without electricity and without killing yourself is the most dangerous variable in the entire system. The most widely used approach is the terracotta pot radiant heater. The design uses 2 or 3 nested terracotta flower pots suspended upside down over a small cluster of tea light candles on a metal tray. The candles heat the ceramic slowly, and the ceramic radiates that warmth steadily into the enclosed space. In a properly insulated micro-shelter of 30 to 60 square feet, 3 tea light candles under a terracotta pot assembly raise the interior temperature by 8 to 12 degrees and maintain that warmth for 4 to 5 hours per set of candles. This is not an open flame. It is a slow, controlled radiant heat source operating at temperatures too low to ignite wood or fabric under normal conditions. The safety rules that experienced builders enforce are absolute. Never leave the heater unattended while sleeping. Always maintain a minimum 2-inch ventilation gap near the top of the shelter for air exchange. And never use anything larger than standard tea lights, because larger candle flames produce carbon monoxide at rates that become dangerous in small enclosures within hours. A second method used in colder climates is heated stone cycling. Occupants heat large rocks or bricks near an external fire, carry them inside wrapped in cloth, and place them near the sleeping area. A single heated stone the size of a cantaloupe retains usable warmth for 3 to 4 hours. 2 stones cycled in rotation can sustain livable temperatures through most of an overnight period. The technique is ancient. The application to modern micro-shelters is a field adaptation that works because the insulated enclosure retains heat that would vanish in seconds outdoors. If you have been finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover survival systems like this every week. I also put together a free guide called The Veteran's Blueprint with specific material lists, sourcing techniques, and build details that I cannot include in this video without risking the channel. YouTube has content policies around certain survival topics. The full breakdown, including the details that would get this video flagged, is linked in the description below. So you have got a structure that blocks wind and rain, insulation that traps body heat, and a heating system for the worst nights. None of it matters if moisture gets inside. Wet insulation loses nearly all of its thermal value. Wet plywood warps, grows mold, and weakens structurally within weeks. And moisture does not only come from rain, it comes from the ground beneath the shelter, from condensation produced by breathing inside an enclosed space, and from wind-driven precipitation that finds every unsealed gap. The ground moisture problem gets solved the same way commercial construction handles it. A vapor barrier, typically a sheet of 6mm polyethylene plastic, is placed between the ground and the floor platform. That costs under $10 and eliminates upward moisture migration almost completely. Experienced builders in Portland and Seattle layer this with a raised floor platform built from wooden pallets or scrap lumber, creating an air gap between the wet ground and the shelter floor. That gap prevents the slow wicking of cold and dampness that makes ground-level sleeping dangerous in winter. For the walls and roof, builders apply house wrap or Tyvek sheeting over the exterior plywood. House wrap allows water vapor produced inside the shelter to escape outward while preventing liquid water from penetrating inward. Without it, moisture from breathing condenses on cold interior surfaces and drips back down, soaking the insulation and the person sleeping underneath it. A 9-foot roll of house wrap costs under $20 and covers an entire A-frame pod with material left over. The most sophisticated weatherproofing technique is the entry vestibule. Instead of a single door opening directly into the sleeping space, a short L-shaped or double flap entry creates an airlock. Cold wind hitting the outer flap cannot push directly into the interior. The occupant opens one flap, steps into a small buffer zone, closes it behind them, then opens the inner flap to enter the living space. That simple modification reduces heat loss from entry and exit by an estimated 40 to 60% and eliminates wind-driven rain from reaching the sleeping area entirely. Each of these systems solves one problem, but a shelter that handles wind and not moisture fails. A shelter with insulation and no ventilation kills. The reason the micro-shelter movement actually works at scale is not any single design. It is the community deployment network that grew around these designs and turned individual builds into functioning infrastructure. In Eugene, Oregon, the nonprofit community-supported shelters coordinates volunteer build days where teams of 10 to 20 people construct multiple Conestoga huts in a single session. Churches donate parking lot space for sanctioned shelter sites. Local businesses provide material donations. Volunteers with no construction experience show up and learn on the spot. The builds run like assembly lines. One team cuts plywood, another bends wire frames for the curved roof. A third team handles insulation. By mid-afternoon, shelters that did not exist at sunrise are standing, insulated, and ready for someone to move in that night. Warming Center staff across the Pacific Northwest have observed people teaching these construction techniques to newcomers without anyone asking them to. The expertise passes the way all hard-won survival knowledge always has, from the hands of someone who figured it out to the hands of someone who needs it next. The model has replicated across the country. In Oakland, California, a build event organized by the Homeless Homes Project attracted over 2,400 interested participants for a single weekend. In Washington State, community groups purchased build manuals and established their own local production. The shelter spread the way all survival knowledge has always spread, person to person, community to community, with each new group refining the designs for their local climate. The key innovation is site sanctioning, convincing cities to designate specific locations where micro-shelters can legally exist, with access to portable sanitation, trash service, and basic utilities. Eugene's municipal code now explicitly permits overnight sleeping in Conestoga huts, placed on property managed by approved community organizations. Other cities across Oregon and Washington have followed. The sanctioned sites give occupants legal standing, which means they can leave during the day to work without returning to find their shelter demolished by a city cleanup crew. When all 5 systems operate together, the results challenge everything about how this country approaches the housing crisis. The insulated shell handles conduction, the reflective barrier handles radiation, the weatherproofing handles moisture, the heating system provides supplemental warmth, and the raised floor platform with vapor barrier handles ground contact. Remove any single layer and the system degrades. Keep all 5 in place and the shelter maintains livable conditions through weather that kills people in tents. One woman who spent 14 months living in a Conestoga hut at a sanctioned site in Eugene measured the interior of her shelter at 51 degrees on a night when the thermometer outside read 22. No supplemental heating, just her body heat and the insulation system. She slept under one blanket. She said that in a tent under the same conditions, you do not sleep. You wait for morning and hope it comes before the shaking stops. The economics sharpen the picture further. A single emergency shelter bed in most American cities costs between $30 and $80 per night to operate. 30 nights of shelter bed operation costs more than building a micro shelter that lasts for years. The math is not complicated. The political will to act on it is what has been missing. Consider the comparison at full scale. Denver built 160 small housing structures at approximately $25,000 per unit. Those are more permanent than a Conestoga hut with electrical systems and plumbing connections. Converted hotel rooms in the same city cost $100,000 each. A standard one-bedroom apartment rents for over $1,600 a month, which adds up to more than $19,000 a year. The $250 micro shelter exists at the absolute bottom of that cost ladder. It is not a house. Nobody is calling it one. But for the person sleeping inside it on a night of 15 degrees Fahrenheit, it does the one thing that matters most. It keeps them alive until morning. And it does it for less than the cost of a single night in a hospital emergency room, which is where many of these people end up when the cold puts them there instead. A 61-year-old former cook named Cynthia moved into a micro shelter community in Atlanta after spending years sleeping in a wheelchair on city sidewalks. She described it in words that deserve to be the last thing you hear. She said, "People think homeless means helpless. I am not helpless. I just needed 4 walls and a lock on the door. That is all it took to start getting my life back." 4 walls and a lock on the door, $250 in plywood and foam, and a community of people who decided that waiting for the system to fix itself was not an option when the temperature was dropping and the shelters were full. The video on screen right now goes deeper into a completely different survival system. Click it and keep going.